Welcome back, everyone, to 101 Questions That Church Planters Ask. I'm your host, Danny Parmalee.
And I'm your co-host, Chris Highfill.
And today we're going to be answering the question, should I have non-believers on my launch team? And this will be a pretty short episode because it's pretty easy and straightforward. The answer is, Chris, give it to them.
Absolutely yes. Absolutely.
It is a 100% yes. We think it's an important factor for a number of different reasons. There's a lot of advantages to it. Maybe we'll start, though, with some of the disadvantages or the challenges. They're not a ton, but just to know, it does make things at times a little bit difficult and a little bit messy. But I have to tell you, if you're not ready for messy and difficulty, then you probably shouldn't be in church planting at all, because it makes for just awkward conversations, awkward interactions, and yet it is so crucial and so important to have non-believers on your launch team, which for a lot of people sounds crazy. So I think one of the biggest advantages to having non-believers on your team is they honestly will give you input that, especially if you've been in kind of a Christian circles or church bubble for a while, they'll enlighten you on things. And I remember for us, one of our early launch team meetings, we planned this amazing outreach until the non-believer on the team said, "That is the worst thing I have ever heard of." And they went on to explain just like how cliche and awkward and the more they talked about it, it's like, yeah, you know what? That's a really fun thing for Christians to do, but for a non-Christian, I don't even remember what it was, but I just remember them making this point of saying like, no, don't do that. And so they were able to give some alternatives, say, hey, if you're trying to create events that non-believers would want to come to and to feel comfortable, consider these different things. So that's, I think just one of the great reasons to have them on the team.
Yeah, and it also inspires other team members. Like, it helps them to understand, hey, this is not a holy huddle that we're creating here. We didn't start this church for people that are found. We started this church for people that are far from God. And to have in the DNA, in the mix of things, and I think you need a healthy blend, right? And
yes.
Like, you can't launch the church with all unbelieving people. Some people have tried that, right? And that's kind of a fun story too. That poses a different set of challenges. But we have met so many planters that didn't have that their whole team was comprised of mature, which is, man, I always want to throat punch somebody when they tell me they're a mature Christian. Makes me want to throw up a little bit in my mouth, because no one's a mature Christian, and it just reeks of pride. I find the most mature Christians have enough humility to say, I got a lot of growing to do, right? But the church planters that we meet, that their team is 100% comprised of Christians, those teams have a really hard time reaching, even they wonder, like, man, why at our launch day? Why are we not growing? Why are we only reaching Christians? Because Christians only know Christians. One of the big advantages of having outside people on your launch team, unbelievable people, is they have a network of lots and lots of people that don't know God either. And they'll invite them, but it's important that you get them on the team. And they're not going to sign a covenant. They're not going to sign an agreement. They're not going to get your tattoo, branding saying that, hey, they're probably not going to wear your bumper sticker. They may wear a t-shirt if you give it to them, but and it definitely creates some awkward conversations, which you should have. So I'm in full agreement with Danny. We had a good, healthy mix. I think on our launch team we had 5 to 7 people that didn't know Jesus yet. And man, it was so amazing when those people got baptized, took a next step. In fact, we baptized some people before we even launched the church, which just brought excitement to the team, and it was a real blast.
Yeah. And I think an important thing that you said there is talking about the mix, because it is true that we've had church planters go to the other side of the spectrum where they're like, I don't want any Christians. I want to just start with one non-believer and, grow evangelistically. The problem is that you do need some stability and to have, I won't say mature Christians on your team, but to have people who have walked with Christ for a while, to have them on your team in and mixed with non-believers. And yes, it creates awkward moments when someone's like, hey, I need a quick smoke break here, in the middle of the launch team, and to watch how other people respond, because that is what is going to happen after you have your public launch. And it's a training time. It's a time for everyone. You use the word DNA in culture. It's so important that people are going to be on your team, a part of the church, that are used to that and rubbing shoulders. And what we see often happen is when we have that uncomfortability, it's the same thing with Jesus and the disciples, where all the religious people were pointing like, oh my goodness, well, what about that person? They're not washing their hands. And what about, they're not obeying that, 600th commandment or whatever. And we saw that was kind of the rub that was happening with the early church. And it's the same thing with church planners. So I think do everything you can to have non-believers. I know for us, besides just the outreaches that we did, even as we were considering how we were doing marketing and those types of things, we were always running those things by them and say, hey, how does this hit you? What makes sense? What doesn't? What does this feel like to you? And you can just get so much different input. Now, of course, there's certain things where maybe there's certain roles that they don't have, and conversations that you say, hey, we want you to be part of this. We want you to experience and be part of the community. At the same time, there are going to be certain things that maybe we wouldn't have you do, or certain leadership positions, which again, we won't cover that in this podcast, because that can get very, very nuanced, and it depends on every situation. So
absolutely. I think the most important thing is that you're out there meeting people, finding ways through service projects or joining civic organizations or something where you're introduced to people like this. And you'll find that there are people that are searching and they're looking for God, and they want to be a part, even if they're unbelieving people, they want to be a part of something new sometimes. Yeah. And man, I think a new church can reach people. The whole point of you starting this church is to fulfill that Great Commission in Matthew 28 and also in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, of saying, hey man, we're going to go and make disciples everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to start that at the grand opening. That should start 6 months to a year prior, while you're in pre-launch, inviting people to launch team. And that's why it's also important that your launch team is not just a Bible study, like finding ways to serve, finding different things to do. That's a whole different topic. But I would say, man, there is plenty of space. There should be plenty of space on your launch team for somebody that doesn't have all their answers, all the questions answered just quite yet.
Yeah, and Chris, one of the things you said that I think is really crucial and important is you're going to have to make that ask an invitation, because there are going to be people who say, oh, I'm excluded. There's no way that you would want me to come to some sort of meeting. There's no way you would want my input on this. So when you do that, you're even communicating tons of things, that they're even experiencing grace in that moment. But don't just think that they're going to be asking you to join the team, because a lot of them won't, because they're like, there's no way, and they might say, oh, I can't be on the team. I don't even believe the same things that you do, or I don't even believe, in Jesus. I don't believe in the Bible, whatever. And they might give all these disclaimers, and you could say, you know what though? You're the type of person that we actually exist for. So, and not that it's a bait and switch or any weird thing that way, but to say, hey, I would love your input, and you can come along and you can ask all of those hard questions. And if you never say yes to those things, that's okay. But we would love to have you part of this journey with us. So
a statement I love making, and I think Jesus didn't say this directly, but he communicated it in a lot of different ways, is you belong here way before you believe. And way before you start behaving like us too, right? And so you want to create that kind of a culture, that kind of an atmosphere where, hey, people can come as they are. God loves you enough to meet you right where you're at, but he also loves you enough not to leave you the same way that he found you. But it's important that they're going to grow up in Christ, and they may do it with you. And so you want to create the kind of space and the kind of place where it's easy for somebody that doesn't have it all figured out just quite yet. And man, I'm glad that somebody invited me into a place like that, and I bet you're glad too. And so could God use your church in the early days? I mean, the starting line of this is not your grand opening. So I think I can't press that enough, is like, man, make sure from day one that people that are far from God are welcomed into the life of the launch team.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of 101 Questions that Church Planters Ask. And until next time, keep asking those questions.